and welcome to episode 111 of our SAP on Azure video podcast. Today is September 22nd, and together with Robert and Goran, we are here to talk about anything related to SAP at Microsoft. Hello, everyone.
Hi.
So a few episodes ago, we started to talk about security at Microsoft. In that episode, we had looked at the world of physical security at Microsoft. How do we protect our data centers? Who are the folks working there? And what does the Team Blue and Team Red do? We even learned about talking to trees. Well, today we want to continue our security discussion, but want to focus more on the cloud infrastructure security. So for this, we have invited Paul back to our show, and he will guide us through another nice whiteboard and also show us some cool demos. But actually, before we hand over to him, as always, we want to start with some news from this week. And Goran, you just brought up the extensive blog post from Cameron.
Yeah, Cameron came with his quarterly long update list. Excellent as always. So we had him in the past talking about the Oracle or the SAP on Azure with Oracle, a lot of details. So here he is first referring to the Woolworths, the biggest Australia supermarket chain. It's a reference customer, and he's also there using the Oracle, where basically he again stressed the to use the Oracle ASM, Automatical Storage Management, as it's, optimized, the best optimized for the Oracle, especially on the Linux, yes. Then if you go down, he has some announcements as well, which we're mentioning as well. So Premium Disk V2, that's personally, that would be a big thing that would come. Yeah, it's still in the not GA, but he would also go through some of the details. An interesting part is SQL 2022. Yeah. So it's going to be shipped or released by the Microsoft soon. And in parallel, SAP is, as always, doing in parallel a lot of those testing in advance. So basically what the customer can expect typically after the Microsoft do official release of the new SQL Server, SAP will also release the support for SQL Server 2022 for the NetWeaver, basically.
And I think especially here, as we talked about before, we have our engineers working directly in Walldorf or in St. Leon Road at SAP, really sitting with the SAP folks, and they are really working on these testings and validations.
Exactly. So here it's mentioned SQL 2022, but also Windows 2022, and basically that joint team is kind of getting the early bits and already doing a lot of testing and validation. So basically to be ready when the GA, when Microsoft releases it as a GA. Yeah. So that's always a good things to do. Yeah. Then he would talk some about the, SAP and Oracle on Azure. He covered basically, those kind of stuff in the previous one. So we can skip it, but it's nice to see it on a basically in one list, right? Interesting for Windows customer. There is there are some, it seems that there are some troubles when a customer enable the antivirus software, and basically recommendation from SAP and Windows department to basically disable the antivirus for the SAP parts, meaning, okay, on the database, data log file, temp files, file share, sub-MNT, sub-log, sub-trans. It leads sometimes to really heavy performance escalation, and that's why. And here is basically the instruction how to do it with the Microsoft Defender, Symantec, McAfee, and others, basically antivirus software, right? For the Linux as well, kind of what's coming up, the newest Red Hat release. 9.0, which is kind of coming as well, and also for the SLES, maybe not to go too much into the details as well. Also, he would refer there on the Microsoft Defender for the Linux. That's interesting. That's coming, right? Customer can use it, of course, but again, also recommendation to exclude the SAP file. And some of the
Yeah.
SAP hot news, and again also about the disk sizes, where he would stress again about the OS disk should not be too small, because that is very often kind of acting as a bottleneck for the data disks, right? So he would give some kind of useful tips and IO stat how it works, and showing, giving some ideas what to do and recommendation as well. So many other links. Let's not go through it. We were mentioning as well, but anyway, as always from Cameron, really nice overview, so to say. Yeah.
Cool. Great overview. Yeah. Good. Then with this, let's switch to some blog posts from SAP. So when you integrate BTP services, so business technology platform services, with
it's called the real stuff.
The real stuff with Azure services, there are multiple ways. I mean, from an SAP Fiori app, you can call directly these Azure services, but if you are using BTP, then you are probably very much aware of the destinations in BTP, and destinations allow you to configure single sign-on principal propagations. And in this blog post, Piotr talks about how to do this in the context of Azure. So if you want to consume services on the Azure side using the destination service, he has some nice examples how to do this, or also guides you through the process, what to expect. So if you are interested in using the destination service, I think that's a very interesting blog post to guide you through these things. Another thing from the developers page on the SAP side is how to consume Office products, and in this case using SAP Process Automation. So similar like on the Power Platform, where we have Power Automate to connect to different sources, and obviously there is a really good integration to the Office products there as well. You can also use SAP Process Automation to connect to Outlook and other tools. So in these tutorials, you can learn how to connect to Outlook, to Excel, and Outlook and Excel. So if you're interested, these are tutorials available for you if you're using SAP Process Automation. And with this, let me actually switch to the Power Platform, because just this week there was, I think, the first Power Platform conference on site actually. So I wasn't there, but from what I've heard, it was really exciting. There were some fantastic announcements between Power Platform and the Office world, and the way how Power Platform and Office works closer together. But there were also announcements regarding SAP integration. And John Gilman, who actually was part of Clear Software when Microsoft acquired Clear Software, has a really nice outlook on a new connector that allows you to use the Power Platform and connect to your SAP system. And the cool thing, it's not only a new connector that brings additional load balancing and single sign-on functionality, but it also comes with some pre-built processes. So there are certain scenarios: order to cash, procure to pay, record to report, with different scenarios where now, as part of the Power Platform, we provide you with certain templates that you can use to get started. So for example, here for this purchase order screen here, this is something that you can load in your Power App, and then if you're saying, well, I don't need this and that, then you can just remove it, maybe add your additional stuff, maybe add some additional connections to the SAP system. And with this, you have a really great starting point to build Power Apps that connect to your SAP system. The cool thing is it's not only for Power Apps, but also Power Automate flows for specific scenarios. So you don't need to look up the required bar piece, but this is a set of pre-configured Power Automate flows. And obviously that's then really exciting, because you not only can use this for Power Apps, so for applications, but you can also integrate this into a Power Virtual Agent. So for example, in a chatbot scenario. So this is, I think there's some really cool announcements there. So this is all about the new connector, but it's definitely worth checking it out. As mentioned, there are these templates. You can download them from the GitHub repository. So getting started is actually fairly easy. If you then really want to do it on your own, here's a documentation on the new learn.microsoft.com. So it was all rebranded from docs.microsoft.com to learn.microsoft.com. Here's really a step-by-step guide on how to get started. So what do you need? Obviously, there are Power Platform trials available and stuff like that. But then what do you need to set it up? How do you configure it? And then, yeah, you can just test it out yourself and really, for example, also use these rebuild solutions to see how, yeah, for example, a purchase order can look like in Power App. If this got you excited, and if you speak German, well, actually, I think the Power Platform SAP part will be presented in English, but in roughly 2 weeks, there's a webinar again for SAP and the Microsoft Power Platform, and there are some customers and colleagues from Microsoft that are going to present. Marisol, actually, she was on our show, I guess, almost a year ago, talking already about Power Platform and SAP. So I'm sure she'll, again, show you some really interesting scenarios and probably also really talk about the latest and greatest from this Power Platform conference. So with this, that's all we had for this week. So maybe, Paul, let's hand over to you. For those who haven't watched the previous episode, maybe you can quickly introduce yourself again, and then I'm looking forward to seeing your whiteboard and the content that you have prepared.
Yeah. So Paul, I work out of a group of our facilities called the Technology Centers. There are 44 of them globally. I work out of the one in Chicago in the United States, and I focus mostly on cybersecurity. And so within that, I talk publicly about what we do internally for cybersecurity, plus what we do external, like what we advocate that customers do, plus the products that we make, in addition to understanding the ecosystem and things that surround us, like our competitors and how we integrate with them. I also talk about our research and development, and that's where Holger mentioned earlier that we talked about trees. We have a lot of interesting stuff in our R&D stack that I talk about, and I'm trying to understand what scientists mean and then tell it to like a 4th grader with the hopes that maybe a CEO will get it, maybe. And then lastly, I also talk about our data center strategies. I give tours of our data centers, and I understand physically what we're doing and where we're going there. So on the last session, we actually talked about those data centers and how they operate physically. It's a lot of fun, actually, and I think even for people who understand data centers, it's still a cool conversation. So go back and look at it if you want to. What we thought we would do, though, in this session is kind of like go above the data center and start talking about Microsoft security strategy, and then maybe demonstrate a few things with you all. And then we'll figure out what we have time for today, and then whatever we don't have time for, we're going to move maybe into another session. And also at that time, we'll be able to pull the covers off of everything that we're going to announce at Ignite. And I have access to some of it, and I'm itching to show you, but I can't. So some of it is in private preview. And so, after we do Ignite in October, then we can come back together and I'll show you all that stuff.
Cool.
Yeah. So whiteboard?
Whiteboard, yes.
Let's do it. Yeah. So I did it the last session in whiteboard, and I think I've gotten almost like now committed to this, although I actually like PowerPoint too, and I love demoing. So hopefully this will be a lot more demo in the next session. I still need to get through a little bit of strategy with you all first, though. So let's get through it. If you've ever sat in a Microsoft presentation, inevitably we put this slide in front of you, and I have a different perspective on this slide, and I alluded to it on the last session that we had, is that, first of all, every company seems to have one of these slides that says, oh, you should trust us because we have a lot of signal, and certainly our signal is immense, and but that's not the perspective that I take on it. The perspective that I take on this slide is that often people have a conception when they see this type of data that we're actually looking at your information. And I have to reiterate, we don't want access to your data. And your data is a liability to me when it's in our cloud. So we are doing every single thing that we can to get away from your data, to the point where we're building collusion events, or we actually refer to them as blind collusion events, in our cloud to make sure that no one person can ever request data without that initial request coming from you as the customer or some other, government entity. And by the way, we operate in a lot of different countries, and so we have to be lawful to those countries. So the rules in China are different than the rules in Germany, are different than the rules in the UK. But we do battle those laws when governments come after us. In the United States here, you should see, we go to the Supreme Court when they act silly, and we tell them that they're being silly, and we usually win those cases. I would say I'm not aware of many where we've lost, if any. Where we've said this is not a request. And by the way, when that happens, I mean, like, I can't give you the exact telemetry, but think all the digits on your hands and feet in terms of days when times that we've actually turned over something to those governments. But usually when we're turning things over, it's metadata. It's not content. In other words, we're not, that would be like maybe one hand worth of times in the United States that actually happens. But it doesn't happen. It doesn't happen frequently. So anyways, Microsoft doesn't want access to your data. I guess that's the right way to say it. And we're building blind collusion events into our system where two people have to approve somebody else's access, but they don't know who are approving it for. And the two people who are colluding to give that other person access don't know who the other person is. And the reason why we're working on that is because we're worried that nation states are embedding actors in our ecosystem.
Oh,
so we have to, pardon?
Interesting.
Yeah. So it's like, it's interesting that we have to play these games, but we're worried about nation states putting actors in our environment and taking, trying to get administrative control. So we've had to start building these blind collusion events so that no one person can work with somebody else to grant somebody access to data without that request coming from you. By the way, we get audited on that stuff too, to make sure that those requests actually come from you or a government. There is not a single person in Microsoft who can touch your data. There's nobody in Microsoft with a standing administrative privilege, not a single person. Every single person has to go through processes in order to do administrative work. Okay, so by the way, last thing on this slide, this used to be like 5,000, but we've started building these things called experts, which actually lets us manage your security operations centers, your SOCs. And so this number jumped by 3,500 individuals over the last year. So It's intense. Wow. Yeah, it's intense how fast we're building these teams. So, okay, well, let me before I transition this. So then, okay, well, if we're doing all this signal processing and we don't want access to your signal, then what is this data? Okay, this is metadata. Now, if you're a metadata person or a security person, you know that if I have a few fields of metadata about you, I can actually figure out pretty much who you are, where you live, how often you go to the bathroom, who your friends are, where you eat dinner, et cetera, right? So the question that you should have for vendors when you see these types of slides is, what are you doing with this data? How does it benefit me? How do you protect it? Okay. What we do with it is something called, my mouse, I need to click and drag and click and drag. What we do with it is something called the Intelligence Security Graph. Now, the graph is not a product that you would buy. The graph is like, this is one of the places that you feel this metadata is in the graph. The graph is just almost like a place where you can access or see all of the telemetry that's coming in. So what is a graph? A graph database is just a database that's optimized for relationships. So think of it like a massive pivot table in the cloud that grows by 171 terabytes every day. That's what the security graph feels like. Okay, and what you feel coming out of that graph is an understanding of everything and how it relates to everything else. And if we find anomalies, that data gets sent into the graph so that other tools, like even your tool, like your own custom developed tools or maybe your own security tools, can consume it out of the graph. So the graph is not something that you buy, but to us, the graph is like this really important piece of connective tissue that lets us take a pivot when we see security events and understanding how it relates to something else. Yep. So like, how does an email relate to a person? How does that person relate to their desktop? How does that desktop relate to servers? How does that server relate to databases, et cetera? And I can show you visually how that all comes together when you look at something like Sentinel or SIM. You can actually pivot on the data. So these are some of the products that contribute to what you feel in the security graph. Okay, so you'll notice things like Defender for Identity on-premise. This is an on-premise tool. It literally sits on your domain controllers. And in security, what it looks for is things like lateral movement, forged reconnaissance attacks, brute force attacks, password sprays, curb roasting, skeleton key, a bunch of security things. Okay, so but essentially this runs in your data center and looks at your users and sees if your users or devices are doing anything anomalistically. We obviously do the same thing up here in the cloud. It's just that, there's nothing to deploy. This runs on your domain controllers. This is built in. They talk to each other, right? So that when you have an identity related incident, we know how the on-prem user translated to the cloud. A few others here, we can look at your keys and look at the usage of your keys as security signal. There's actually something built into our SIM that allows us to do something called deception tech. Some security people refer to these as honey tokens, where if you use a key or a secret that is not supposed to be used, it'll set off alarms. So anyways, that's actually called honey tokening or deception tech, but that's in there. We can use your endpoint signals as a part of this. So your Mac, your Linux, your Android, your iOS, obviously Windows, okay, as part of the signal. We can use your data usage as a part of the signal. So your Oracle databases or your, some maybe SAP HANA database or a SQL server, regardless of where it lives, right? On-premise, in AWS, in Google Cloud. It doesn't make any difference, obviously in Azure. We can use that signal as something to key in on. This could also be unstructured data like PDF or CAD files or Notepad things or obviously Office. That can all be a part of the signal. We can look at your users and your usage of their things to say hey, I don't want you to copy this to a thumb drive, or you can't print a credit card, right? So down here, we generate all this threat intelligence, and this is one of those things that I'm looking forward to showing you in October. But this Defender for Threat Intelligence is actually a part of an acquisition that we had last year called Risk IQ. And so we obviously generate a lot of threat intel because of those 24 trillion signals, but we also ingest it from the likes of Risk IQ and others. In security, those are referred to as taxi or STIX feeds, but we do this in security a lot, and this will be a fun space to watch. Briefly, we can use your IoT signals, your webcams, your printers, things as part of, or the things that live on your machines on your shop floor as signal. That's all natively integrated. We can use your Office 365 usage as a part of the signal. SaaS applications like Salesforce.com or ServiceNow or Workday or ADP or anything that's cloud OAuth or SAML enabled, we can hook into that and control what you can do there. I don't want you to put a credit card here. You can put a credit card there, that kind of stuff. Quickly, we've also got this is cloud infrastructure things, and we're going to show you some of this today. So things like your servers, your switches, your routers, your storage, regardless of where they're running, on-prem, in our cloud, in somebody else's cloud, okay? We can also look at your CI/CD pipeline. So if you're writing source code, or if you're using something like Terraform, Azure DevOps, GitHub, we can look at when you publish code and see if you're doing insecure things. You've incorporated the source code from something and that source code just got breached, or you put a connection string in the clear, or you wrote code insecurely, right? This will tell you. And then lastly, the same thing, but for AI models. So Python and R scripts and understanding if those are doing something malicious, because bad guys went there, so we had to go there too. Lastly, we have a SIM. But the thing I want you to take away from all this slide is that there's nothing to integrate. This is all integrated. All you're really doing for the most part is turning things on. You might be pointing one thing at the other, but all of this signal is integrated. And if you didn't do this, you would have a lot of integration to do. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, Holger, any questions? Any questions, Goran or Holger there?
I think you go ahead, Goran.
It's out of the box value. I mean, any kind of integration is if you don't have it, you have to develop it. It's a pain and cost.
That's right. Yeah, just take one of these lines here and imagine if you pulled out Defender for Endpoint and you replaced it with, CrowdStrike, or pick another tool, And then you said, okay, well, now we've got to integrate CrowdStrike with the SIM. We've got to integrate CrowdStrike with our IoT stuff. We've got to integrate CrowdStrike with identity, or, Mimecast or Proofpoint, or like some other, tool like here in Office, right? That's your intellectual property, believe it or not.
Yeah.
Even when you're loading a connector from somebody else, you're maintaining that thing.
Yeah.
So in this case, there's nothing to maintain. So we take some of that burden off. Yeah. Cool. So where I wanted to go next was just a little bit of a discussion on zero trust. Zero trust means a lot of things to a lot of people, mostly because every vendor has a different slant on what zero trust is. So Microsoft's interpretation is pretty broad in scope. Behind the scenes, there's something called NIST 800-207, which zero trust is based on. But Microsoft really has a pretty broad interpretation of that. So you almost have to understand, like, what does Microsoft mean when we say zero trust? And I'm not going to walk through all of this just because I want to demonstrate more than I want to talk. But I want you to understand that we're basically building scores here, like user risk scores, like session risk scores. Like, what is your sessions appearing risky? Is your user appearing risky? Is your endpoint being managed? Is it compliant to your policies? Like, is it configured properly? And then in the middle, what we do is we take some of that information and we have an engine that decides what I'm going to allow you to do. And you might think that that engine would have just one rule, but that's not true. I'll give you an example. Like maybe you would allow your employees to fill out their expense form from an unmanaged BYOD device, but you wouldn't want them touching your core SAP ERP stuff, right, on an unmanaged IP, from an unmanaged device. So depending on your perspective of risk, you have different ideas about what you allow users to do. Okay. Now, inside of Microsoft, we tend to think, most of us think of these as conditional access policies in our own cloud. But there's also an infrastructure element to this. And so in infrastructure, we think of these as WAF and firewall rules. Okay. So just depending on your perspective, if it's like end user facing versus infrastructure. Next, we have kind of a concept of your network, and I'll give you a little bit of insider baseball here too. I'm not as interested in your IP in certain cases. Like some people will be like, oh, is it a public or private network? And usually they would say, okay, well, I delineate that by knowing the IP address of the person coming in. But let me give you a little curveball on that. Let's just say that I breach one of your users' accounts and I VPN into your network using that breached account.
And is my IP address? Fine.
Yeah. How much do you like my IP address now? It's your IP address. So on some of these things, you'll note it, like if, maybe we can do this on the next one, but I can actually specify not your IP address for the location, but I can also specify your geo coordinates of the user and where they're coming from, according to the device that we have for multi-factor authentication. Yeah. So, so like, that's, but then basically over here on the right, we decide, well, what am I going to do with you? Given all, and notice that I'm ignoring these things on the top and the bottom here, but over on the right, what will I do given my concerns? Well, I might encrypt some data or label it as it's moving into, out of SAP and into like Box or Dropbox or something. Or I might say you can't put that file there. I won't allow you to put that file in that SharePoint site. It can go in, in some other solution over there, but not in that site. We don't allow credit cards or social security numbers like there. And once again, this could be for unstructured data like emails and documents, as well as database data. I can say, I don't want you to put that data in that database, right? The question is how? How do we pull that off? And that's actually a part of our purview strategy. And maybe we'll cover that in another element too, in another session. On adaptive access, we already talked about this one, but I want to kind of expand on that for a second. I can do that. I can say like, hey, you can't upload. Maybe you can upload from a BYOD device, but you can't download, right? So I could say that for a SaaS application, maybe, like let's just pick on Salesforce.com or ServiceNow, whatever. But also on-premise applications without the use of a VPN, that's where it gets interesting for me. How do I take some legacy application on your private network and expose it to the world without the use of a VPN and put all of this zero trust stuff in front of it. And that's actually using something that we have in our arsenal called Azure App Proxy, which if you're listening to this podcast and you own any Microsoft cloud stuff, you own App Proxy because we pretty much give it away. So it's one of the most powerful tools in our arsenal. And the reason why you never hear anybody talking about it is because there's nothing to sell you. We probably gave it to you with any license agreement that you had. So our salespeople are like, well, they own it. Why am I going to talk about it? I want to talk to them about stuff they don't own. Yeah. Anyways. Lastly, down here on the infrastructure, and this is really, where we're going to finish most of our time here today. I can make decisions about what you can do for a server or a PaaS service or like a container in Kubernetes or some, Lambda thing in AWS or a function in Azure, for example. I can also make a real-time decision about whether or not you can publish source code or even be an administrator, right? So all of that's really important. However, the one last thing I want to mention on this slide before we start getting into demonstrations is these little dials that you see here are really important. They don't seem like they would be. And by the way, it says over here in the lower left, telemetry, analytics, assessment. But the assessment is the important thing. Behind the scenes, there's something new coming. Well, it's actually in the stack already, and it's written right here, continuous evaluation. It's actually a protocol that you will see becoming the norm more and more. And that acronym is called CAPE, which is actually a misspelled acronym. It stands for Continuous Access Evaluation Protocol. And what it means is that if while you're in the middle of doing some work, let's just say within SAP or within some application, and something changes, I can throw you out of that session no matter where you are within about 15 seconds. The maximum is 15 minutes.
Wow, okay.
So what that means is that there will be, over the course of time, what you'll see is this concept of time to lives or tokens will just go away. We'll give you a token, it will last forever, but if anything changes, I can throw you out. So that's where you're starting to see us really build on this capability to be able to say, like, even at like within an RDP session or a window, a FAT client, anything. If I don't like you, you're out. And then you have to re-authenticate and prove to me that you're healthy, perhaps. Or I just lock you out and reset your password. Holger, Goran, any questions there?
And basically you would orchestrate this through the policy, so to say. You would deploy the policies, okay, behave in such situation this and that way, and the cloud would do it for me, so to say. Right.
Exactly. So, where you see, I can bring it up quickly once I get in here, but like the only option with this continuous access evaluation protocol stuff is basically to disable it. I've never come up with a scenario where anybody is, I've done the long dramatic pause with many customers and said, I can't think of a scenario why I would want to disable CAPE, and I wait for them to give me one, and nobody has. So, but that's really your only option going forward is just disable it if you don't like it. But like, I can't imagine a scenario where you, pardon?
Why would you? Exactly.
Yeah. Why would you? Exactly. I mean, unless the application just appears risky all the time and it just keeps, or whatever. But I don't know. That's maybe it would be a debugging thing, but that's about all I can think of. So anyways, that's the role of zero trust. So let me just start showing you some things. Okay. So what I want to do is, I want to go in here and the very first thing that I'll show you is we have this concept of something called privileged identity management in Azure. And what PIM allows me to do is even if you're using a dedicated account for administration, which you should be, if you're not, please do that, right? You shouldn't use like your Holger account to do administrative work. Because then if I breach Holger, I've got his email, I've got his administrative creds, and I've got access to whatever he had access to. If I'm using a dedicated account, then the likelihood of that account getting breached, but it goes, is less. But even though Holger might have a dedicated account for doing administrative work, I still don't just trust that. So what PIM allows me to do is make the person jump through some hoops in order to request being an administrator. So you'll see here, like, global administrator. This one and compliance administrator are the two scariest roles that I can think of in Azure and kind of Office 365. This gives me access to all the administrative stuff. This gives me access to all the data. So here's the thing. If you're going to give people choices like security reader and global administrator, Goran, Holger, which one are you going to choose every single time?
Global administrator.
Of course, because we're lazy as a human race. I mean, like every person is like, well, what if I decide that I don't want to be a reader and I want to be an admin? So if you're going to make people go through these hoops, when you set these roles up, and I can't do it right now because I haven't requested the role, but like when you set these roles up, you can specify what hurdles you want them to jump over in order to be an administrator. And some of the examples are maybe you need an approval by your manager. Maybe you need you want to put a message in Teams and notify the other administrators or send an email. Maybe you only want this person, the global administrator, to be available to them for an hour, and the security reader you give them for 8 hours, right? So this guy constantly has to recheck out as global admin versus this one that constantly works, right? So those are just a few examples, but there are many others that you could invoke. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead.
No, I just wanted to echo that I think this is really, really powerful, because typically then if I have a certain task where I need global admin rights, then I probably don't need it for a week or something, but I need it for a very certain period of time. So I would request access. Maybe my manager or someone else could approve it. Maybe we would also have a tracing message, a tracking message, like you said, into a Teams forum that also other colleagues know, oh, Holger now has admin rights for a certain period of time. And then I have 1 hour, I can perform my tasks maybe, and then automatically this privileges are removed from my user, and then I'm just a normal user again without global access rights.
So this is the zero trust stuff. It said, like, I haven't used this credential in a little while, and what it's saying is, I'm not sure that you're still Paul. Could you prove to me that you're Paul? That's basically what you're seeing right here. This is zero trust in action, even for a privilege identity. So what it's saying to me is, I need you to prove that you are, and I'm going to do it through my Authenticator app here. And now I've gotten a notification on my phone. Now you'll notice the number here. It says 67. On the consumer side, what we do is we typically give people 2 or 3 choices. Well, 3 choices, but that gives the consumer a 33% chance of guessing it correctly. What you'll notice here on my phone, if you look at my camera, you'll see I'm in Chicago, and I have to type in that code. This is actually called contextual MFA, and what it's telling me is like, hey, user, not only is there an MFA, but here's where it's coming from. Now, if I saw this coming out of Brazil, I might be like, well, that's not me. Right? So what I'm going to do is I put in 67 and I say yes here, and then it uses my face, and it's doing that on my iPhone, and it says approved, and then this goes forward, right? So now I have the ability to now check out the global administrator. So now it says validating request, and you'll see that'll go by, and now I can be like, well, I only want to be a global admin for like 5 hours because I'm doing a demo for SAP folks. Okay, this would get triggered. A ticket like this might get put in my ticketing system, like ServiceNow, for example.
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah. So I would say activate, and this is the longest 15 seconds ever. But what'll happen here is this activates my role now, and I have this essentially for 5 hours, and I can be an admin. In this tenant, I didn't set up as many hoops. Because I need to be able. I don't want to have to jump through all those hoops to do these demos for you, but ideally, that's what you would do for a global administrator. And I can show you where these are configured. It's in Azure Active Directory. Basically, you set up, when you set up the role, there's all the settings for the role, and you'll see there's just a list of things that you can make them do, and you configure those.
But I think even the small 2-factor authentication, I think that's also so powerful. And unfortunately, I still see a lot of customers not using it. It's so easy, and as you said, with the Authenticator app, you get the much more contextual information, like where is this coming from, and I like the sometimes I have to feel it changes whether you need to enter a number or whether there are a few other things that you need to enter. Sometimes there are different flavors of how you need to authenticate there. But I think that's a really easy and powerful way to secure your account.
Exactly. Agreed. Yeah. So I can actually say, like, if I want to deactivate this too, I can take it away from myself. Another person could actually deactivate me as well. But you think of it like a library book. I've checked it out for 5 hours. Okay.
Yeah.
So now if I go into, and let me just show you that in the Azure portal real quickly here. If I just go to the Azure Active Directory, for example, where you set those up, if you go into roles and administrators, you'll see all the list of these roles, right? And so I was granted what somebody did is they granted me all those roles that you saw in that list, but there are many more here that I don't have. So, but if you go into something like global administrator here, and you go into the role settings, you can see these are all the things that I can force people to do. Like, do I generate an alert? Who am I alerting?
Yes.
Who am I notifying? Do I notify the user? Do I notify somebody? Et cetera, et cetera. And I can, this is exactly where I can make these changes just by clicking at it. So I could, right now, you'll see, I don't even agree with this, but this is not my tenant. So they set this maximum duration for global administrators to be 24 hours. I think that should be by default like 5. Maybe 8 at the maximum, but not mine to control. Okay, so but anyways, all of these are things that you can set for the role. Yeah. So next, what I wanted to do is just a little bit of kind of zero trust for administrators. What I wanted to do is talk a little bit about the problem that we're trying to solve with infrastructure. Okay, so if you look here, this is really insulting, team. I know, but for any of you watching this, that I'm about to insult your intelligence like crazy. But just bear with me for a second. I got to explain something to you. Okay, so this is a classic 3-tier architecture. So what you'll see is things like load balancers and DNS, and then you have this line represents a firewall. I should have written it on there, but firewall. Okay, I'll put it on there. But like, so like we have a firewall here. So each of these lines represents a firewall. So, right, so I would take these firewalls and I would use them to separate different, what we call demilitarized zones for each area. Okay, so like I have a web tier, an application tier, and then on my back net, I have all of the stuff that lives on my private network. I will say that Microsoft doesn't do this anymore like it's listed here. We do these things, but we do not do this. So if you look at the Microsoft network, ours looks more like this. And so what happens is you have, things that are coming, like requests that come in here, right? And they'll go through a load balancer and then they'll hit a web server, and the web server filters out to, just takes the web traffic and then sends something to the application tier. And then the app tier talks to all these other things. Like it might say, well, I need to communicate with the database. I need to talk to a directory and I get some files, right? Maybe this other app talks to like a line of business, like SAP or like some other line of business, right? But you get this, you start drawing these lines between these apps to say, well, how do they relate to each other, right? And so this is kind of, I know that this is basic, I get it, but here's the problem. When you go to your security person and you say to them, go secure that, right? The security person says back, half of that's not mine. I don't even own it. I can't tell the web developer what to do. I don't control the app. I can't control the app developer. That's a different team of folks. Maybe I have direct control over the Active Directory and the directory credentials, but I rely on the SAP HANA guy to do my database permissioning. He does all the security there. I don't tell the storage guy how to configure security. He gives me a list of what's possible, and I tell him what I think is nice, right? So security has a lot to do with influence and very little to do with control often. Maybe the security person only directly controls the firewall, the DNS, and maybe some of the directory stuff. In most companies, I would argue that's pretty true. So it's a question of, like, A, how do I get visibility into all the things that are out there as a security person? And then B, how do I just even prioritize what to do or what to tell them to do? Okay, so that's part one. The other thing that inevitably happens is that somebody will come up to you and say something like, yeah, not only that, but we need this whole thing to be SOC 3 compliant, and it's got to be ISO 27001, and it's got to be NIST 853. right? And so then you're like, oh, well, thank you very much. It was bad enough before when all I had was influence over these, and now I've got to try and convince them to do the right thing based on some SOC 3 requirement. And what happens for security people is they just swim in, they just basically tread water trying to figure out, like, what should I do? What should I do next? Who am I supposed to talk to? I don't even know how things are configured, right? So our goal with Microsoft security tools is to give people visibility regardless of where their infrastructure is. I don't care if it's in AWS. I don't care if it's in Google. I don't care if it's in VMware. I don't care if it's on-prem or in Azure. I don't care. What I care about is, how can I give somebody visibility and then prioritize for them what needs to be done, taking into account not only that there are security controls that I need to do, but also compliance things that I need to do. By the way, when I mentioned that we don't do this anymore, if you go into a Microsoft office now and you get on the wired or wireless network, I don't have the exact figure, but I know it was 85% prior to COVID. 85% of our offices are now off of BACnet. In other words, I'll just show you really quickly what that means. Like here, if you look at my workstation and I go into the system here and I go down to like system and I go down here to about, and you look here, it says domain or work group. I got to drag it onto the screen here. You will notice that it says I am in a work group. By the way, I'm on a Surface Studio. I am not saying my laptop is a stud, but it's in a work group. So not only, so in other words, I have no rights to anything else on this thing, on when I'm in the office, to any other workstation in that network. And because of this, right, we also use something called LAPS on our workstations, which stands for Local Administrator Password Service, meaning all the passwords for local administrative accounts are different on every single device. So if I breach my machine, if something breaches my machine and I try and climb laterally to Goran's machine, I have no credentials to Goran, and all of the administrative accounts are randomized. So literally things like ransomware die in our offices. And because there is no BACnet access, I can't go from I can't do this. I can't go from here. Sorry, I wanted to draw here. I can't go from here to here. That's not possible. I have to go out to the internet, right? I go out to the internet and then I come back in through that app proxy thing to get access to our BACnet resources. So we don't do VPN anymore at Microsoft either. I have a VPN client. I had to use it one time in the last 8 months to sign my sales access within SAP, which we still have some SAP on the BACnet. Before that, I don't know, Goran and Holger, when was the last time you had to use VPN?
I didn't. I know I have VPN, but I'm not using it. Yeah.
You forget that we even have it. Like we have a VPN client on our workstations. It's there. I mean, but like we still have BACnet stuff, but it all goes through app proxy now. And so I can describe, maybe in a next session, I can actually demonstrate app proxy. But so let me talk a little bit about, so this is what we call this, forget the desktop stuff. I just went on a quick tangent here. If we come back to this, what we call this around giving people visibility, and when I say we, I mean the industry, is something called cloud security posture management. So what is my security and compliance posture? So if I go in here to Defender for Cloud, this is where we start to show you your security posture. Now notice, it doesn't matter what the cloud is. By the way, Azure also includes on-prem. Okay, so if I had hooked this into my on-prem resources, you would see those listed as a part of Azure. Okay, but if it's in AWS or GCP, I can drill into any of these and say, what does my security feel like? Okay, and when you see these percentages, they're not implications of, your goal is not to be at 100% with security posture management. Your goal is to say, have I done all the right things that I'm supposed to do, and what should I do next? Or what in theory, yeah. So if I go into security posture management here, what you'll see is I can look per thing that I have access to. So Google Cloud, Azure, and AWS. Let's just look at Azure because I've got the most things there. They all look similar, okay? But when I look at this, it basically gives me some idea of the risk associated with my environment. And what we do here is we give people points for fixing things. So what we say is, given industry best practices or what we're observing within your tenant of something right now, here's what you should do next. So when new things happen, you'll see these will become this order changes. So today, the top one is 70% of the score is enable MFA. And Holger, right to your point, you don't often see this every place. Like I see a lot, wherever you see red, it means there's some things going on here that need to be addressed. So in other words, MFA should be enabled on accounts with owner permissions on subscriptions, right? Or on MFA should be enabled on accounts with write permissions on subscription. So if I click in there, it will tell me all within a subscription, all of the unhealthy resources where these people don't have MFA enabled on their accounts.
Cool.
So, and then I could go and fix it here. And so right, I don't have the ability to, I have to check out another permission here to do that. But like, I could actually go and fix that. You'll also notice down here, some other things that are grayed out. I could ungray them, but like here, I could trigger a logic app. Now, Holger talked about this, through Power Automate. Power Automate and logic apps are twins of each other. They're just meant for different audiences. So Power Automate is meant for the citizen developers of your company, whereas logic apps are meant for people who manage your infrastructure and the orchestration of infrastructure. Okay, so, but they feel the same. Like literally the workflows look the same, the connectors are the same. So here what I could do is say, well, anytime I see one of these MFA should be enabled on a subscription account with owner permissions, I could have some workflow say, hey, put a ticket in ServiceNow, notify the person's manager, and notify the user that they need to go to this web page to register for MFA.
And basically without programming.
So absolutely. As a matter of fact, team, and I'm not kidding here. I can't write code to save my life. I am not, my Hello World app fails. I'm a terrible code developer. I really have to force myself into writing code. I'm terrible. I can write logic apps because they're all, if you've ever played with the website called If This Then That, it lets you create workflows out of little connectors. So it'd be like, turn on my lights when my door opens, right? Or turn off the alarm when the garage door comes up. You can do those kind of automations with If This and That. It's exactly the same. And so if I want to put something in ServiceNow, I just go to the library, I choose ServiceNow. It says, I need these 4 fields of data. I plug those in, and then it'll create a ticket in ServiceNow. And all I have to know is those 4 fields of data. Yep. So that's what this does. Also notice that I can create an exemption here. I could say like, yeah, well, I know that I'm supposed to do this, but maybe as an example, I am using a third-party tool like Duo for MFA. Azure doesn't have a concept of that because I'm doing it outside of Azure, but I'm using Duo. And we'd be like, excellent, you can do that. You can also set an expiration. You can be like, well, we're using Duo today, but we're going to reevaluate that in 4 months. So how about if I create a reminder for myself, and then in 4 months, this will raise back up and say you need to do it, right? I can also assign an owner for this. And so I can say like, who owns this? And that's where this is here. So I'm going to cancel that. Here I could be like, anytime one of these pops up, I'm going to give it to Holger. Right. So here I could set Holger as the owner of this, and I can give him like a grace period every time it shows up of like 30 days, so that he's got 30 days to fix it. Okay. Make sense a little?
Yeah.
Yes.
Cool. So we go back in here. Yeah, I wanted to show you another one here under remediate vulnerabilities, just to give you a sense for like some other neat things here. So you see like one of these says machines should have a vulnerability assessment solution. Okay, so like if I click onto that one, you'll see some other options here. And if I click on this server, you'll notice this blue box shows up that says fix. So for a lot of the things inside of Defender for Cloud, you'll see this fix option. And what it gives me the ability to do is just resolve the issue right now. So if I click on fix, it's going to ask me, do I want to load? So remember, it said a vulnerability assessment needs to be enabled. OK, so I can choose one that comes right out of the box with Microsoft, or I can, if you buy this, we also give you a license for Qualys, by the way. So because we play well in the sandbox with them. Or you could say, no, I have my own, in which case it'd be like, well, Azure would say, well, here's the ones that I'm aware of within your tenant. Which one do you want to enable? And I'd be like, Rapid7, proceed. And it will just go install Rapid7 on that box. So the nice thing is that you can automate a lot of these things and say, hey, if I ever see this, just go fix it with Rapid7. And it'll be like, yeah, sure, no problem. You can absolutely do that. Cool. Okay.
I mean, what I really like about these recommendations is typically you might be really overwhelmed by the amount of security things that you need to look after. And here you have a nice ranking actually that says, look at this, go down this list to fix these issues. And there are a few more, but I like this point, the scoring mechanisms that really guides the user to say, look, there are things that you need to address, and here are the things to fix it.
Yeah, and the point that this isn't static, like, so there was a threat that came out a few months ago called Log4j.
Yeah.
And it was when Log4j shipped, you saw these all reordered themselves, and remediate vulnerabilities moved all the way up to the top because of what we were seeing in the space. So these are not static. These point scores will change, they'll morph, they'll over time. But what we're trying to do is give you some sense of how bad is it? What should you do next? So yeah, and you can also, like, notice you can filter down to resource types. If you're like, I only care about container registries, fine, here's all the recommendations for containers, right? Yeah. Or if you said, I only care about storage, right? It doesn't, we can slice and dice these reports all day long. Yeah, so that's the security posture stuff. There is a way to be more proactive in here, and that's under environment settings. I can just say, like, hey, anytime a new storage thing shows up, a recommendation or a security thing that needs to be addressed, just give it to Goran. He owns all storage things. Paul owns all firewall things. Holger owns all database things, right? In environment settings, I can actually specify that. And the way that you do it is just by going in here. Oh, sorry. Oh, wrong one. Sorry, I clicked on the wrong thing. Back. If I go into the tenant and I go to the subscription, you will see here called governance rules. And with governance rules, I can say, like, anytime, we'll just do this, you'll see I've already got one storage stuff here, but we'll recreate that. So I'll just say storage, right? And what I can do is by recommendations, and here what I would just say is anytime, these are all of the potential ones that show up around storage. So I just check all these boxes, boom, 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 boom. These are all storage related, right? And I'd be like, okay, anytime any of those bubbles up, the owner is Holger, right?
Nice, yeah.
Right, so now I don't have to focus on this. What Holger will get is an email periodically saying, Holger, you have all the storage things to resolve. These are the ones that are new. These are the ones where you're past due, and here's what you need to do to fix them. And it'll actually tell them exactly what to do to resolve the problems. It's not just, oh, you have a problem, but it's also like, you have a problem, here's what you need to do. Yeah.
Cool.
So when you go in here, then storage, if I go into storage security, if I run a report, if I look at the governance report here and I go into storage security, oh, darn it, didn't want to do that. I just wanted to click on it, not like, if I go to storage security, you'll see, here's all the things that I'm supposed to be doing. Here's what's overdue, so essentially as the guy who is the security person, I know that, like I said, Holger has databases and Goran has storage, and I've got firewalls. I can be like, well, how is Goran doing today? From the all up from the CISO perspective, how is Goran doing? How is Paul doing? How is Holger doing with his initiative? Yeah. Make sense?
Yeah. Wonderful.
Cool.
I mean,
all right,
this
so I'm going
is
to pause there.
go
ahead, Goran. Sorry.
Broad area end to end. It's. I mean, you have to have an idea what to check. And also you have to have an idea how to fix it.
Yeah.
And here's on a plate. It's huge. It's big. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. Well, it just saves a lot of time. That's what, and I would say, like, cloud security posture management tools are all pretty similar. I think the benefit of us is that we get the visibility of Azure without any, and AWS and GCP because we're connected right into their APIs. We get the things instantly. In some cases, we don't even rely on agents. We can do things in an agentless way, and that's that's going to be something that you see us pushing on in October as well, and more agentless capabilities. I'll be able to tell you that more about that in the coming months. But like, yeah, it's pretty powerful.
Yeah.
So I wanted to bring, this is one of the last things I wanted to show you in terms of this content. And I apologize, because I know, like, when people do this to you, put these really busy slides in front of you, like, I know it's in a whiteboard, but this is a slide. I apologize for how busy it is, but I want you to understand how our signal flows through our tools. And if you understand how the signal is flowing, then you understand what different layers are doing, and also how we're not duplicating efforts here. Okay, so what you'll see here is down at the bottom is all of the things that can generate signal. And so what we have is infrastructure like IaaS, PaaS things, and you notice like Java, JBoss, VMware, AWS, Google, don't care, right? It's just infrastructure and apps. We have PaaS services, OT and IoT data. So this is your webcams, your machine things, your printers, your temperature sensors, etc. Identity things, right? Endpoint things, email and SaaS application information, and data, right? And you'll notice Oracle and MySQL, etc. Right? So if you follow these up, you'll see that this section here moves up into Defender for Cloud, which is what I was just showing you. Okay. If you follow the blue lines here, you'll notice that those go to Microsoft 365 Defender. However, all of this blue box means something. Okay. This is actually a portal called security.microsoft.com. So essentially what you have is the Defender for Cloud stuff talking up to our overarching security signal. Okay, so in other words, not the SIM, our SIM is up here. This is security.microsoft.com. This is where you see our CASB, our Defender for Office 365, Defender for Endpoint, Defender for Identity, all of those things, along with the Defender for Cloud stuff that I just showed you, all shows up in security.microsoft.com. We also have the Defender for Cloud portal. If you're only a infrastructure person, this is just your filtered view based on your stuff. This is going to seem a little strange, and it's not real. But if all you had was stuff managed by Microsoft, in theory, this blue bar right here would be your SIM. Okay, because you wouldn't really need a SIM. You have a full threat hunting environment here, etc. That's not real. This is what I mean. It's not real, because even Microsoft brings other tools to the party, like Palo Alto or something like that. We'll bring another tool. And so as soon as you need like an F5 or a Checkpoint or a Palo Alto or a Duo or CyberArk or Lookout, whatever, Symantec, McAfee, whatever, then you follow this blue line up, and that's where our native signal meets other security signal in a SIM. Okay, so you can follow the blue lines from Defender for Cloud up into Sentinel, or you can follow the black line, and you could say, hey, I'm just going to take security.microsoft.com and send it into something like Splunk. You can also play the game where you go up into Sentinel and down into Splunk, or go from Splunk to Sentinel. We play these games all the time in security. One of the reasons why we play from Sentinel into Splunk is because I would say a vast majority of our signal can be brought into Sentinel for free and kept there for 90 days. So if you think about this in terms of like data, this could be terabytes of log files if you took this out and pushed it into Splunk. So what we do is we just, like, what some customers will do is they'll be like, oh, we'll put that into Sentinel. And now instead of pushing terabytes of log files via this black line, we'll be taking megabytes of actionable items into Splunk. And so now your ingestion charges just went from like, maybe let's just say $10,000 to like $50, right? Yeah. And however, that has some upsides and some downsides. Some upside is that you now figure things out faster in Splunk, and I can explain why. But the downside is you're now hunting in two different languages. You're hunting in SPL over here and KQL over here. So it has some security implications. What I meant by speed, the thing is that this is the last thing I wanted to mention here, is as signal is moving up, we're not having the tools reason over what we already learned. all we're doing is adding more data. And all of that's going into the graph, by the way. Okay, so like what we're doing is, as Defender for Identity, or like here, figures out something at the identity level, all we're doing as it moves up is we're adding infrastructure telemetry to say, well, did that identity touch any servers? And if they did, we can show that. If not, we'll be like, oh no, it didn't. And then we'll just send the data up into Sentinel. And then when Sentinel will be like, oh, you figured something out, Defender for Identity, excellent. And all it's going to do is take other stuff from over here and merge it with what we learned over down here. So in other words, we're not reasoning over logs to figure things out. What we're doing is saying, oh, good, you figured it out down here. What I'm going to just do is extend it as it moves up. And if you close a ticket in Sentinel, it will close it down here as well. So there's this bi-directional communication. But what we're not doing is pushing log files around. We don't do that, right? We're just consuming API, essentially, almost like watching a Twitter feed, if you will. Make sense?
Yeah,
absolutely. Yes.
Okay. So I wanted to pause there. I know we're running out of time, right, Holger? Or how are we doing?
No, I think we should come to an end. I mean, not because it's not exciting. I think it is, but as you said, you just talked yourself into another episode, and I think
That's right.
as you mentioned, with Ignite coming up pretty soon, there will be a lot of new announcements. I also know a lot of announcement on the SAP side that we'll talk about, obviously, but also from a security point of view. So I think what would make a lot of sense if we wrap it up here, and then we'll definitely have a follow-up with additional new great announcements that we can talk about, and then probably in the October timeframe. I think that would be really fantastic.
Yeah. So I think what I'd like to do with you all, Holger, and we'll figure this out, is maybe that for the next session, I'd like to actually show how all of this signal processing moves through here. So you can see how the Defender for Cloud stuff shows up in security.microsoft.com and how that lands in Sentinel, and then how we bring all that together so that you get a better feel for how the signal is moving through our platform. And then I'll show you all the other cool stuff that we've got going on too.
excellent.
Sounds like a perfect plan.
Yeah, it sounds good. Well, thank you guys, Holger and Gordon. Thank you guys for giving me time. I think I was on episode 108, and then you do 3 more episodes while I'm away, and now I'm on 111. So I'm looking forward to being on 114 or whatever it is. It's incredible how many of these you guys put out, though. It's a lot of work.
Thank you. No, it was a pleasure having you again, and I'm really looking forward to seeing you again in one of our next episodes.
Yeah, me too. It'll be fun.
Cool. Thank you, everyone. Talk to you soon then.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.